Hey there, this is Killer Orange Cat. The following are four true scary stories from my hometown, the Windy City, Chicago. The Underground L Station. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, where it's pretty difficult to get around if you don't have a car. I personally don't like driving, so I didn't have one. When I left to go to college, I decided to attend the University of Illinois in Chicago. The university is set to the west of downtown. I lived in the dorm as a freshman, but decided to get my own apartment during my sophomore year. I didn't really care for the area around the university, so instead, I found myself a place to live in Lakeview. This is an area on the far north side of the city. It was easy enough to get around in the city, due not only to the L trains and the CTA buses, but UIC offered their students what was called a U-Pass. A U-Pass was a unlimited ride pass to use in all the trains and buses in the city. What made it even better is it was all included in tuition. Now, while commuting to school was easy enough and affordable enough, the one thing I didn't like about it was that it took extra time. While I was in the dorm, I could just leave my room 15 minutes before class and I was never late. Using public transportation from the north side of the city, I had to get out the door no later than 2 hours before class. Due to the amount of time it took for traveling, I tended to try and cram as many classes into as few days as I possibly could. So, the semester in which this story takes place, I was attending school only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The first week of December, I got out of class late one day. One of my friends, who still lives on campus, invited me over to his dorm room to hang out for a while. I accepted. We had some drinks and talked a bit, and before I knew it, it was already 2 a.m. I finally told him I had to get home because the earliest I'd be home leaving then would be 4 a.m., and I needed to get some sleep to be up in the morning. So, I left the warmth of his dorm room and stepped out into the biting cold of the Chicago night. I walked along the nearly empty street to catch a bus that would take me downtown so I could catch the Red Line L. Being in Chicago downtown late at night was a significant difference from being there during the day. Although there were people walking around, there were not many. Downtown Chicago turned into a ghost town usually about 6 p.m. And the trains, which generally came by every 7 minutes during the day, only came every half hour in the middle of the night. Even worse, I had to go into one of those underground stations, and they were not well heated. I had brought a hat and gloves, but Chicago winter will very often cut right through your hat and gloves. One of the most annoying things that can happen to you in an L station is while you're going down the steps to the platform, you can hear the train pulling into the station. You can choose at that point to hurry down the steps, and if you were lucky, you might catch the train. More often than not, you won't. This happened to me when I was on the down escalator. I heard the train pulling into the station. I rushed down the stairs, but there weren't many people on the platform, and they loaded onto the train pretty quickly. I just missed it as the train pulled off as my feet hit the platform. Damn it! I breathed to myself. Now I had to keep myself occupied and warm for the next 30 minutes. I tried sitting down on one of the benches, even though I usually didn't care for it. I was alone at first, as everybody else had gotten on the train before me. My hands felt cold and my knuckles felt dry as I waited for the next train to arrive. The underground stations downtown were very close to one another. In fact, if you peeked around the corner, you could sometimes see into the next station. In fact, if you wanted to, you could walk from one station to the other with a tunnel. There was a small yellow walkway that connected the stations to each other. That night, I was at the Washington station, which was set up that way. After I had been sitting there for a little while, I noticed somebody walking on the walkway from the previous station. I really didn't like being alone underground like that, so at first I felt a bit of relief. As I glanced over, though, I noticed it was a ragged-looking homeless man who was wearing an extremely thin jacket and no gloves or hat. The one thing I really hated about living in the city were the homeless panhandlers. I don't mean to be insensitive, but anyone who lives in Chicago knows you can't give change to every homeless person who asks for it. To do so, you'd have to be making over 6 figures a year and you'd still lose money. At first, I tried to keep looking down to indicate to this guy that I was not going to give him any money. He was standing right at the end of the tunnel and stepped onto the platform, and he noticed me. After standing there and looking at me for a moment, he slowly began walking towards me. I tried to ignore him, but I had to keep watching him from the corner of my eye. He was very strange. I mean, he had to be frozen or nearly frostbitten due to the biting cold and no hat or gloves. And the way he walked was so weird. He was hunched over, his left shoulder hanging down, and his head lower than his right shoulder. His head was also hanging to the side. It was like he was looking at me diagonally. As he walked towards me, he barely lifted his feet off the ground. In essence, he was dragging them with each step. It was obvious he was freezing and likely in pain, but I was just so uncomfortable I just wanted him to go away. The homeless man kept slowly walking closer and closer to me. It was obvious he was coming up to me. He probably wanted some change or my gloves or something. I shivered a bit, both from the cold and the apprehension. Finally, as he approached, I heard the train coming from a distance. It wasn't too far away, so it would take only a minute or two to arrive. I stood up, intending to walk to the far end of the station where the derelict would not be able to reach me before that train arrived. I looked over at him, and I saw that he was smiling at me as he shuffled along. I stood there for a bit longer. I intended to leave right away, but he would not break eye contact with me. As I heard the train approaching, I just waited for it. The man reached into his thin jacket and pulled something out of his inside pocket. It was disgusting and some sort of thin, leathery material, and it was covered with what I could have sworn was blood. Right as the train pulled in, I watched him take it. It was some sort of mask, and he pulled it over his head. The train stopped by us when he was only about 10 feet away from me. It was then that I heard him tell me, "It's my other face." Fortunately, I got onto the train and it closed without him trying to get on with me. As the train pulled away, I looked back and saw the man looking at me. I wondered if he was smiling under his other face. Ever since, I just used the buses to get to school. The audition. When I got out of high school, I immediately moved from the suburbs into the city of Chicago. It was my dream to be an actor, and living in the city would make it much easier for me to get to auditions. I forewent college because I was sure I had enough talent to make it on my own without any schooling. Well, for anyone who's tried to be an actor, you'll know how naive I was. Not only was getting parts next to impossible, getting auditions was nearly as impossible. I was unable to get a single audition in the summer, none in the fall, and I went into the beginning of winter without having had a single audition. Finally, about a week before Christmas, I was calling the Chicago audition hotline. Keep in mind this was long before the internet was as prevalent as it is right now. After hearing the regular ads, which were mostly just for musicals, emphasizing dancing or moving well, as they called it, and singing talent that I just didn't have, I felt like giving up and almost slammed the phone down. After about 10 audition advertisements, though, I finally came across one for a small part in a local independent film. It was an unpaid position for a teenaged male in a small, unspeaking role. The audition was listed as being in Evanston, and they gave me a phone number to call. They also said not to call before 8 p.m. I thought that was kind of strange, but I really needed a part, so I waited. An unpaid role on my resume would be much better than having a blank resume. When 8 o'clock rolled around, I went ahead and called the number. The phone rang about 10 times, and after that I finally got an answer on the phone. A strange and somewhat strained voice answered and greeted me with a, "Hello?" I was taken aback, assuming that the person answering it would at least have answered in some way that might indicate it was a number for the audition. Hi, I'm answering the ad for the movie role," I responded, quite uneasily. After a long pause, the man said, "That's fine." He then gave me the address and the instructions as to which number to buzz when I arrived. "If we liked you for the role, we could film you right after the audition." He then hung up the phone. Now, I know what you're thinking reading this. I would have to be an idiot in order to actually go see this guy for this audition. Every single thing about it was just suspicious. I was desperate, though. Other than my high school plays, I had absolutely nothing on my resume. I needed something. Well, I got bundled up and headed out the door. I didn't have a lot of money, so I figured it was just best for me to walk down to the metro station. It would take me right into downtown Evanston. It was freezing outside, and it actually might have been below zero. There were some people outside, but not many. After a long freezing walk, I made to the train. Happily, it came pretty soon after I got there, and I spent about half an hour riding on the train, looking out through the green windows before I finally got to Evanston. If I thought the area around me seemed really quiet and dead, Evanston was even worse. When I got off the train, there was really nobody around. I was met by a snowflake-filled and chilling breeze hitting my face. I looked at my directions, and I knew it was going to take me a while to get to the place. And it did. It took me nearly 40 minutes of walking, but around 11:15 p.m., I finally found the building. It was nothing at all like I thought it would be. Rather than an office building or a studio, it was an old brick apartment building with a gated front yard. There was an apartment buzzer on the gate with about 30 buttons on it. I found the name I was looking for and buzzed. I waited maybe a whole minute and a half before trying again. The second time, someone buzzed me in without even speaking through on the intercom. I made my way into the building without encountering a single person. Walking down the hallway, I eventually found the door. I felt very uncomfortable, but I really wanted this role. I knocked on the door. Much like the buzzer, no one answered right away. But after a couple of minutes and a couple more knocks, a man opened the door. He was taller than me, really skinny and pale, with eyes set deep in his dark eye sockets. He barely opened the door when his eyes grew wide. "You've got the part," he immediately told me. "Come in, we'll film it right now." He stepped back and I was able to see that the apartment lights were all off. Well, I didn't want to go into that apartment and finally wished that I hadn't come for this audition in the first place. The whole thing was just way too odd. I asked myself why this man was casting me in a role sight unseen for a film and wanting to film the scene right away. When I didn't move to walk in, the man looked mildly impatient. "Well, come on," he insisted. "You want the role, don't you?" I stood quiet for a moment. I just wanted to turn and run and just fuck the entire acting career. Nervously, I answered, "Yeah, what's the role?" The man half smiled at me. "Come in and I'll show you," he told me. I went ahead then and stepped into the apartment, and he closed the door. The hallway I was standing in was dark, and there was only one light on in a far-off room. I immediately regretted going into that apartment. Well, I didn't move. I don't think this is the best idea," I responded. "I think I should just leave." The man looked mildly angry. "I stayed up for you to come to the audition, and I cast you right away," he informed me. "Are you really gonna waste my time by not coming in? I could have cast 100 other people easily today." I stood there and shuffled my feet. I looked nervously at the door, and I wondered how fast I could get to it and get out of the building. I didn't feel like pointing out to the man that the whole Layton's thing was his idea, so he had no reason to be using that against me. I stammered, I really don't think I'd be right for it. I don't really have the time to actually film anything right now." "You don't have to do anything," the man told me, extremely impatient. "I just have to film you lying on the ground, since you're going to play a dead body." My heart skipped a beat, and I knew I had to get out of that apartment. The man was too close to me, and I wouldn't have been able to open the door and get out without him catching me. My only chance was bluffing him. Pretending to be relieved, I lied. "Oh, okay, that's a relief. I just thought it would be a dancing role, since, almost every audition in Chicago cares more about dancing than acting." He looked at me skeptically, but nodded. "Well, come in here and we'll film it. You can never have enough dead bodies." The man turned slightly to move down the hallway. After he took a few steps, with my heart pounding against my chest, I turned quickly and latched the door. The man had taken a couple steps, but turned back to see me when he heard it. However, him turning was the last thing that I noticed as I threw the door open and ran out the door of the apartment. I have no idea if he followed me, because I was not about to look back. I booked my ass out of that building, out through the front gate, and I didn't stop running until I was back at the metro station, waiting on the platform. I nervously looked around, expecting the man to have been following me. The trains only ran once every 2 hours that late at night, so I had a long wait in the freezing cold for the train. I didn't care, though. I'd rather be freezing to death than actually dead. I was also sweating from the running, so I was very fortunate I didn't get sick. But again, better sick than dead. I didn't feel relieved until I finally boarded the train. I called the acting hotline every day, and about 2 months later, the ad was up again. This time, however, it was in Ithaca, not Evanston. I wondered if I should call the police, but I didn't think I really had anything they could do. I called the acting hotline message center and told them about my experience. I never heard an ad like that again, and I hope it was because the hotline quit posting it. I prayed every day that he never cast that part. A Walk in the Park. This story takes place in 1993 in a town north of Chicago called Grays Lake. The only thing Grays Lake is really known for is the hard rock band Chevelle hails from there. It also has tons of new homes and these subdivisions that I like to call Lego houses because they all look the same and they seem to spring up overnight. Well, in 1993, Grays Lake wasn't like that at all. It was a small retirement community with a small high school. There was a few small businesses and a park. For the school, there wasn't any bus service within the actual town. So if you lived in town, you had to either get a ride from your parents or walked to school. The majority of students walked. Now, I didn't grow up in Grays Lake, but I did transfer there during my sophomore year of high school. Unlike other schools I'd been to, I actually made a lot of friends at Grays Lake. I joined the drama club and was immediately cast in my first play ever. It was Harvey, and I played Dr. Chumley. It was a lot of fun, but it mainly gave me time after school to hang out and talk with my new friends. Often we would sit around talking way past sunset, and then have to walk home in the dark. It didn't matter, I've never really been scared of the dark. On Friday, October 15th, it got dark very, very early. A female friend and I were the last two people to leave after rehearsal. It was only 9 o'clock at that point. Although I was only 5'7" and a whopping 135 pounds, I've always had a lot of bravado, and I offered to walk her home because she didn't feel safe walking home alone. She asked me if I would be scared walking home afterwards, and I basically told her not to worry about me. I don't get scared easy. Well, I really had never been to her home before, and hadn't been aware she lived on the full other side of the park. I walked her through the park to her house, said goodbye to her at the end of her driveway, and after she thanked me and walked into her home, I began my own walk back. It was getting pretty cold outside, so I shoved my hands into my pockets as I walked down the street. I found the gateway into the park and entered it onto the paved bike path. I was about 1/3 of the way onto the path. I felt very uncomfortable because I was the only person there right away. It was also very dark. That park had very little lighting. I figured that must have been because most people don't take walks in the park in the pitch black at night. Well, when I got on the path, I began looking around, trying to convince myself I wasn't scared, just cautious. After I walked for a while, I glanced behind me, and I saw a man who looked like he was in his mid-20s walking on the path, a bit of a way behind me. I didn't see much about him, but he was wearing a red polo shirt. I had no reason to think the man was up to anything, but I did feel my heart start to beat a bit faster. Grays Lake has never had much of a crime rate, so I figured I was pretty safe. Still, despite my apprehension, I figured it was best to just keep my pace. If the man was up to no good, and I started running faster, he might start running after me. Well, as I walked along, I tried to not keep peeking behind me, but anybody who's been in a situation like that knows you always have to look. After a few minutes, I noticed that although it didn't seem like the man had sped up, he had gained on me. I didn't get a good look at him, and decided I should simply speed up at this point. As I walked faster, I glanced back and I noticed that he was walking faster too. My heart began to race, and I finally began to get scared for the first time, or at least the first time I had admitted to myself. A quick peek back revealed he had gained on me more. I saw the exit to the park getting closer and closer, and I went ahead and sped up, speed walking at this point. I quit looking back, and with my heart racing, I got to the arch gateway that led out of the park. Although I tried not to look behind me, my right eye caught something in my peripheral vision coming at me from behind at an incredible speed. I felt a jolt of electricity course through my body as I realized a man was running at me and I was not going to be able to get away. However, with my heart pounding in my ears, I saw a young boy on his bicycle pass me on my right, and he just kept riding away. Once my nerves calmed down, I remember the man following me in the park, the whole reason I was scared. Turning around, he was gone. I had no idea where he went or why he went away. I'm just glad he did. I probably mistook him for somebody doing something bad. He may have just been messing with me. So, I went home. At school on Monday, I came across my female friend. She told me that after I dropped her off, her mom had wanted to come outside and give me a ride home, but I had left too quickly. I told her I appreciated it, but it wasn't necessary. She then told me that her mom had been worried because her father was a police officer, and her father called her and told her that there had been a rape and attempted murder at the local Shell station. She told me earlier in that night a woman had bought some gas. This was before pay at the pump was common, or as far as I'm aware, existent, and she paid for a car wash. When she was going through the car wash, the clerk manually shut the car wash down, locking her in. He then got into the car wash, brutally stabbed and raped the woman, and locked her in her own trunk, leaving her for dead, and planning on dumping the body later. He put an out of order sign on the car wash. However, thank God the woman was not dead. She was able to kick out of the back seat of the car, and she got out of the car wash and went for help. When the clerk found out she was missing, he fled from the station. He wasn't caught until the next day. I have no idea what happened that night. I'm a guy, and I doubt that a man who had raped a girl would try to rape me. However, he did try to kill her, and if he was scared he would be caught, he may have tried to do something to me. I don't know. What I do know, though, is that I have since been into different Shell stations, and the polo shirt that man was wearing was identical to the one the employees were wearing. And I know, for the period of times I was walking through Central Park that night, a man who tried to kill a woman was on the loose. The drive. I should preface this by saying that I'm gay, and I've always been very shy. I've always had a problem meeting people because I can't walk up to people and introduce myself. So, since I can't, I've tended to use the internet to meet people. About 10 years ago, I was on a website called gay.com while I was living in Chicago. I generally would only talk to and meet up with people in my area because, although I had a car, I didn't really want long-distance relationships. I preferred to have people around that I could go visit on short notice. And notice is very important, as you will learn later. However, I started talking to this man in Milwaukee, or actually right outside of Milwaukee, and he was a pretty nice guy. We got along really well, and he was very polite to me. After we had talked for about a week, he asked if we could meet up. He offered the drive to the city, and told me that we could do whatever I wanted. Well, I didn't have to drive, and he was being really nice to me, so I agreed. It was a 2.5-hour drive, which I didn't envy him. When he arrived, he was pretty nice. We spent some time together, had lunch, went out to see a movie. It was Munich, the Steven Spielberg film. Then we drove back to my place. We didn't go inside, but we sat in the car by my bedroom window and talked for about an hour and a half. Then finally he left and went home. A few days later, he asked me if I'd like to join him up in Milwaukee. I had enjoyed our time together before, and he had made a 2.5-hour drive to see me. So I thought the least I could do is return the favor. So, much later at night this time, I made the drive up to Milwaukee. Now the man lived in a house, a 2-story house that was actually very nice. He had told me previously he was renovating it. I parked my car and walked up and knocked on the door. No sooner did he open the door than he shoved a glass of Chardonnay into my hand. He had learned from our previous encounter that I was quite a sucker for white wine. He'd also picked out a horror movie, another thing that I'm a sucker for, that we could watch that night. Well, as we were watching the movie, he was insistent on keeping my glass as full as possible. While this doesn't really bother me too much, as I love wine, it has a tendency to go right through me. No more than 45 minutes into the movie, I had to get up and use the bathroom. He told me to walk up the staircase to the second floor, and the bathroom would be the second door on the right. Well, I walked up there and did my thing, and coming back down, I had to remark on the staircase, which was unusually steep. It was then that he made this comment. Yeah, I guess if I was a serial killer, it'd be the perfect place to hang somebody, wouldn't it? I was completely taken aback. That was just a very awkward thing to say to somebody who's been in your house for no more than an hour. However, we were watching a horror movie, so he may have just been getting into it. Well, I sat down to finish watching the film with him, and I stopped drinking my wine because I decided I would just leave after the movie. When the movie was over, I thanked him for a nice night and for the wine. And he asked, "Are you leaving?" Yeah, I told him, I really need to get home. I don't sleep well in other people's beds. He asked me if I was drunk at all, and I told him no, I need to have a lot more wine than that in order to get even a bit tipsy. But he insisted I didn't go home. Well, I have 3 extra bedrooms and tons of blankets and pillows. You're welcome to sleep in any of them. I mean, I'm not going to try anything on you. Well, him trying anything on me was the last thing on my mind to begin with. My mind was still back on that serial killer comment. Well, another thing I should mention about me is I have a problem getting myself out of conversations. I'm not good at asserting myself. The more I insisted I needed to go home, the more he insisted I should stay. So finally, after about 10 minutes of this, I decided I'd try to scare him. Now, I'm on medications for obsessive compulsive disorder. I take Prozac and a medication called Seroquel, which is a atypical antipsychotic. Now, I'm not psychotic, but it helps me sleep. It also comes in handy for getting myself out of situations, and I hope to use it that way this time. I told him no, I need to get home because I didn't bring my pills with me, and I need to take them before bed. You see, I take antipsychotics. I made sure to pronounce it that way. And believe me, man, you do not want to see me if I haven't taken my meds. He kind of scrunched up his face as if he didn't believe me and asked me what antipsychotics I took. I told him it was Seroquel and asked him if he'd like me to explain to him how they work. He refused and still tried to get me to sleep over. I eventually told him I had to go, and it did take a while longer, but I eventually left. On the way home, I decided I would not be seeing him again. I got home at about 4 o'clock in the morning. 5 hours later, I was awakened to my door buzzer. I was on a first-floor apartment, and I had a security camera, and I looked at it, and it was him. He was standing outside my door, buzzing to get in. This man who I'd seen only 8 hours before had driven all the way from Milwaukee to Chicago without calling me or giving me any indication that he was coming. On a whim, he just drove 2.5 hours. Well, I was not about to answer the door, so I ignored it. Then I remembered that we had sat outside my bedroom window the previous night that we had hung out. So I slowly crept over to the window and shut the blinds. Then I laid down with my back to the wall, so even if he could see in, he wouldn't see me. Sure enough, after 5 minutes, he went over to the window and started banging on the window. And tired of that, he went back to the front door. He continued this pattern for about an hour. Now, I know what you're thinking, why didn't I call the police? Well, I honestly thought that he would lose interest and go, and I really had no reason to really think that he was going to hurt me, because he couldn't get into the apartment. But he tried. After maybe 90 minutes of really trying to get in, he finally gave up and went home. 3 hours later, I got an email from him. He demanded that I pay him back for the gas money that he had taken to come see me. He told me he knew that I was in there, and I'd done a really stupid thing, and a really thoughtless thing, by making him drive all that way for nothing. Well, at that point I'd had enough, and I had to tell him I didn't make him drive, and I didn't even invite him, and I told him how creepy it was that he even showed up, and he still demanded that I pay for his gas money, and I at that point told him to never contact me again, because now I had the information in an email, and if he ever showed up again, I'd call the police. Well, he did stop contacting me, but I thought about it often, very often. This man was obviously unbalanced. I mean, the serial killer comment could have been attributed to the movie, but who drives that far to see someone they barely know without telling them they're coming? I don't know. I just stopped meeting people on gay.com after that. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope I'm getting a better feel for this. I know my voice may sound a little quick at times, but I'm hoping to get better with practice. I want to thank you for listening, and as promised, reveal to you which story had happened to me. Well, the story that happened to me was a walk in the park. The story of the Shell Station rape. Well, the rape didn't happen to me, obviously, but I was the guy who walked my friend home, and while I was walking home, an attempted murderer was on the loose. If you like this video or any of my other videos, I invite you to subscribe to my channel. I think I'm getting much better at it, and I hope you'll enjoy the ride as I continue to hone my craft a little bit better. So thank you for listening, and as always, no matter how much you think it, no matter how badly you want to believe it, you're never truly alone.